Hello guys, my name is Ashwin and welcome back to the case study. There is a famous quote that says, "Fiction reveals truth that reality obscures," which means that fiction always contains something that never exists in our real life. With that in mind, after Squid Game Season 2 was released in December, you must have seen this photo on Instagram and other social media, which stated that Squid Game is not a TV show but is based on a real incident in Korea in 1980. And a lot of people are going crazy over this thing. But there is another famous quote which says, "Good fiction creates its own reality." And in this case, the same happened. Any stories running on media, or whatever stories were being told, were not true. Even the photos I just showed you were generated with AI help by a Turkish artist named Siti Hermitai, who themselves did not consent to using these images in this way. Even Squid Game's director Wang Dong-hyuk never mentioned Brothers Home in his show-related interviews because Brothers Home was not something like Squid Game. It was actually far worse. Yes, there might be some similarity between both, but the narrative being spread on social media was completely wrong. And this is unfair to the victims of Brothers Home, because the inhumane and brutal things that happened to these people you cannot even imagine in your dreams. So let's learn more about today's case revolving around the infamous Brothers Home. This case began after 1950, when the Korean War between North and South Korea finally came to a halt. After the Korean War, North and South Korea were completely divided, and South Korea was severely impacted by this war. Millions of people lost their lives, many people's homes were destroyed, and many were separated from their families. Also, South Korea's economy had completely collapsed, causing many people to be on the streets. At that time, seeing homeless people, beggars, and orphans in South Korea had become very common. This became a significant problem for the South Korean government because these people were a big stain on South Korea's reputation. Therefore, starting from 1960, the government took an initiative to cleanse society by moving people into vagrant detentions and welfare centers. These centers were basically housing facilities for homeless people and orphans so that they would not disrupt the healthy social order in normal South Korean cities, and the country's reputation would not be tarnished. The government called this a Social Welfare Service Act. According to this act, police patrol teams were created in every municipality who would detain homeless people and orphans in their area and send them to these welfare facilities. But these police did not have any specific criteria to decide who was homeless, who was an orphan, and who was just wandering on the street. They also received money from the government for every detained person, an initiative that caused police to detain anyone according to their own will just to earn more money. Now, you can see how problematic this was. In some cases, if police saw a random child walking alone on the street, they would detain them without checking whether their parents were alive or not. Also, on paper, everyone detained was supposed to be released after a year, but in reality, this never happened. Due to the greed of these police, countless people and innocent children were seemingly separated from their families forever. 36 welfare facilities were established across South Korea, where these people were sent after detention, and the government also provided funds to these facilities so they could operate. Brothers Home, located in Busan, was the largest among all these facilities. In its early days, Brothers Home was known as Brothers Orphanage, but in 1970, as the facilities expanded, it was turned into a Brothers Home, where not only orphans but also other homeless people were admitted. The then director of Brothers Home, Park In-gun, promised that the education and welfare of every person living in their welfare facilities was their own responsibility. But nobody had any idea what inhumane and horrific things were being carried out inside Brothers' home. Those who know about Brothers' home often compare it to Nazi concentration camps, which just puts into perspective all the inhumane things I have been talking about. The victims, people, and prisoners who were created inside Brothers' home were not subject to the normal societal laws or external laws at all. Instead, only the laws created by the higher-ups of Brothers' home, specifically Park and Gun, were applicable. All the prisoners were divided into platoons or groups, and each group had a commander who was also one of the prisoners. Group commanders were given some special privileges by the higher-ups, which caused some people in the group to become the commander's sycophants just to enjoy the privileges given to commanders. However, at the same time, if anyone in the entire group broke a rule, even by mistake, the punishment would be given to the group's commander. A hierarchy was maintained within each group, where everyone was given work according to their age group, physical condition, and gender. It was basically like an army that worked only for the corrupt and cruel people of Brothers' home. Now, you might have a question about why Park and Gun and other higher-ups made prisoners commanders and gave them power and privileges. There could be multiple answers. Actually, firstly, this saved them a lot of expenses as they didn't have to pay anyone for this work. Secondly, by giving power to one of the prisoners, they ensured that unity would never be formed among the prisoners. They knew that if the prisoners of Brothers' home came together, containing them would become impossible. This was a very clever way to make sure this never happened. Just to put into perspective what people had to experience there, I'm going to tell you the exact statements of one of the victims who survived Brothers' home. Joy Shong was just 13 years old when one day, while returning home from school with his brother, police officers took this 13-year-old child and burned his genitals.
옷을 벗기고 바지를 내두게 하고 자기가 담배 피우던 그 라이터를 가지고 뜨겁게 달구어서 성기를 찢어버렸더니 고통스러워서.
Then, while admitting him, they said the boy was an orphan and sent him with his brother to the Brothers' home welfare facility, but Joy and his brother had no idea where they had landed.
근데 그 조장이 저를 너무 세게 때리는 바람에 이빨이 깨져버렸어요. 앞니가 깨져버리는데 그 형들이 뭐라냐면 또 난다, 뽑으면 된다 하면서 그 붉은 실을 가져가 생리를 뽑아요. 보시면 알겠지만 이빨이 하나도 없어요.
Joy was in a group where the leader and his companions had already stripped him naked on the first day and poured cold water from ice over him. He was not given any clothes and slept shivering in the cold without clothes or a blanket. But at night, the group leader had also sexually abused him. On his very first day, Joy understood that the higher-ups and the people living there were no less than animals. People's lives were being taken like animals. Seeing someone's blood or their body being disposed of had become a common thing for Joy because it often happened in front of him. Once, when a man questioned the group leader about why he was imprisoned and why he was being tortured, 4 people wrapped him in a blanket and beat him until he died. Physical abuse of women, children, and even men was a daily thing, and you can see it was a daily routine for them, which is just so sad.
Park Soon-hee was 16 the first time she was raped by a commander.
그 안에서 모진 구타와 성폭행을 매일 밤마다 성폭행을 당하면서 생활을 쓰고 있습니다. 지금 가서는 어떻게 살지?
Every person living there was malnourished because they were barely given anything to eat and were made to do slavery all day. Another question that might come to your mind is whether these people ever tried to escape. And the answer is yes. They did try times of escape, but whenever such a mass escape plan was made or the prisoners inside would plan such a plan, someone would always inform the higher-ups about this plan out of fear, so that the prisoner would receive less punishment or almost no punishment. Basically, in a way, they were selling their comrades or cellmates for less punishment or to gain favor with their higher-ups. If you have watched the AT show, I think so. I am saying that on Netflix, the name of this series is right. If you have watched the AT show, the concept is shown quite effectively, not on a large scale, but people do such things to more powerful people or people they think are more powerful. Escaping from Brothers' home facility was almost impossible because the entire facility was surrounded by 7-meter-high walls. Think of this as Attack on Titan walls. Let's say it's like that. Outside, people could come in, but inside, people could not go out. The only time someone could escape was when they were sent outside the facility to cut wood or do some other labor work. But as I said, all these plans would fail. All those who had come there, separated from their families, had now made up their minds that they would never see their families again. And others had also decided that the only way out of this hell-like place was their own death. But in 1980, the activities inside Brothers' home started to suddenly come to public attention, and rumors began to spread that people were being tortured there. The Busan District Prosecutor's Office received a tip from a local hunter that a group of laborers were cutting wood on a mountain in Ulsan County while being beaten and tortured by the guards. After this, the district prosecution started a full-scale investigation, and shortly after the investigation, it was found that the loggers' workshop situated on that mountain was being operated on the orders of Brothers' home director Park In-jun. And considering the rumors around Brothers' home, the prosecution office had already suspected that these wood-cutting laborers might be inmates of Brothers' home.
제 생각은 아주 단순했습니다. 이건 중대한 범죄죠. 단 한 명을 갖다가 이렇게 감금하고 강제 노동을 시키는 그것도 중범죄잖아요. 이 수십 명, 수백 명을 갖다가 이게 말할 필요가 없잖아요.
In January 1987, interviews were conducted with more than 100 people living inside Brothers' home. And after hearing their statements, the ground slipped from under the investigators' feet. In the 12 years of Brothers' home's operation, around 4,000 people had lived there, and in 1986 alone, close to 4,000 people were admitted to the facility. Most of the money that Brothers' home received from the government was going into Park In-jun's pocket, and the least amount was spent on the people living in the facility. Most of the money was spent on getting drugs, which the facility managers used to keep everyone under their control. When further investigation was conducted, bank receipts worth 2 billion won were found in the safe of his office, along with an attached torture room where Park In-jun himself would have the inmates tortured. This proves that Park In-jun had become so blind to money that basic humanity had been lost in him. Out of 551 confirmed deaths, it was found that he had personally killed at least 40 people with his own hands. When this investigation was ongoing in 1987, 30 prisoners successfully escaped from Brothers' home during the same investigation, after which everything that happened to them came to light for the entire world. When these matters started coming to the public, people were comparing Brothers' home to Nazi concentration camps. And after so much had happened, the government finally shut down Brothers' home and released all the surviving people back into normal society. But this was not the end of their nightmare, unfortunately, because after leaving, They were never seen as normal humans by society or people around them. Brothers Home was the first, or they were released just this fact. Even after knowing this fact, people were afraid of that man or woman. After release, no one was talking to them properly or not talking at all. No one was willing to help them, and even after release, many people had suffered mental trauma and mental disorders. Because of this, they were admitted to mental hospitals, and a lot of them committed suicide. It's so ironic, right? Like, you finally get freedom and your trauma is so intense that the first thing you try to do after getting freedom is to take your own life. I don't know. I don't even know what they must have felt at that moment when they were inside. But still, life was never the same for these people after they got out, as soon as they entered Brothers Home. But some people somehow managed to preserve their sanity, like Choi Young-woo and Han Jong-sun. They had decided that they would not stop until they got justice for themselves and other victims, and until the entire truth of Brothers Home came to light. That's why they protested a lot, so that the government would conduct a detailed investigation into the case. And their efforts were not in vain, because by 2022, after new investigations, the number of deaths was updated from 551 to 657. And it also came to light that human trafficking was happening in Brothers Home, and young children were being sold to rich people abroad for money. Those who were killed, their bodies were also sold to hospitals, and many were secretly disposed of. So the total deaths could actually be more than 657. Now, I know 100% sure that you might be thinking that after so much was discovered, there's no way the main culprit, Park In-young, could have escaped. Now, with the government, right? But that's the worst part. With his money and connections, he was only charged for corruption and was sentenced to only 2.5 years of jail time in 1987, which is basically nothing for the crimes he committed. I mean, can you imagine this person committed crimes at Hitler's level, and even then he was kept in jail for just 2 years and lived his life normally. And he died in 2016 before the actual investigation happened. So he never received punishment for his actions. And that is the saddest part of this case. But yes, this is real life, and not every story has a happy ending, right? They were not part of a game, nor were they going to receive any prize money. The prisoners of Brothers Home were just pawns of the corrupt, greedy, and inhuman higher-ups like Park, and they had no choice but to obey. To be honest, I request everyone to put an end to these viral posts and stop comparing it to Squid Games, because this was not fiction, this was the reality of many people. People are comparing Brothers Home and saying that Brothers Home is basically a real-life Squid Game, and I kind of understand that. But there is a very big difference between the two. The participants of Squid Games had a choice from the beginning that they could leave and could just not attend this thing. They were in some way wanting to be part of this game, even though the game was unfair and rigged against them, purely fueled by their greed and needs. But in Brothers Home, none of the people had any choice from the beginning. But with that, this case ends here for now. I would just like to say that Brothers Home was known, not famous, but thankfully through social media. This case did not go unnoticed in front of people. It has come to light, and it is very horrifying. But I think knowing about such cases is extremely important, both within and outside the country, because this just gives you awareness, and also mentally prepares you, not only for one person, but for an entire society, that if something like this ever happens, then how are we supposed to act? Because if you don't know about things, then how are you supposed to prepare for these things? You might not have heard that saying. This is from a game, by the way. What you don't know, you don't know. It is actually true that if you have never heard about situations, no matter how much your fight or flight mode is, You cannot come up with answers at that moment. Maybe so. I think that this case coming out and spreading so much on social media, even with AI-generated photos, I don't care. I think it's a very good thing that this case has come out in front of everyone. But before you go, guys, if you like watching true documentaries, then please subscribe to me and I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.